I couldn't really do this first episode without Emily Wearmouth. She's a technology communications consultant who I met many years ago when she first went freelance. Emily started off working in agencies nearly 20 years ago, so she's the perfect person to talk to about productivity and practices and habits that actually help you along in your job. So I'm really excited to ask her some of the questions that I've been asked recently when it comes to what it's like working in lockdown in an agency. Emily, why don't we start off by just a quick recap from your point of view of your career for us?
Yeah, I fell into PR like I think a lot of people do, and started off at Axicom on their graduate programme. There were just two of us, and so it was sort of a lot of it was learning on the job and within client accounts. I went to Hotwire, sort of following the traditional tech agency as it was path, and then from Hotwire I had the opportunity to go to Australia, and I worked out there for a while, which was particularly interesting for me because an awful lot of my career had been built around international clients, and so it was sort of a posting at the very edge of the comms network for a lot of clients. So that was quite an experience. Then I came back, I went to Octopus, and that was in the era of a big focus on integrating PR with marketing. So started doing things like HubSpot certifications very early on. And then I went freelance. And as part of being a freelancer, I've done some consulting with agencies and spent a number of months sitting embedded within agencies. So I worked with Babel. I also spent a long time at Fleischmann Hillard Fishburne, as was. I don't think they're called that anymore. So really it's given me an opportunity to experience a lot of different agency setups, as well as being a freelancer. I sort of sit in this role where sometimes you're viewed like an agency and sometimes you're viewed like an in-house person. So that's sort of my experience in a nutshell.
Do you actually ever get to a point where, even at the most senior level, you do get to get rid of the shitty admin work that just bores the crap out of you?
No. I'm trying to think of a flouncy way to say that. No. And I think that's a really interesting question. It hits to the core of, I think, a lot of the job dissatisfaction that ultimately leads to burnout that people experience. That the way we set up PR agencies, we incentivize people. We make the roles above people look really aspirational. And so people spend the vast majority of their career charging away from the job that they're doing at the moment and desperate to get onto the next one. The promotion speed within a PR agency is naturally very fast. I mean, I was a director before I hit my 10 years, I think. That's incredibly fast. But if you go through your career always thinking, I get to drop the things I'm doing at the moment just as soon as I reach the next level, you fundamentally don't stop and find ways of enjoying what your job is. And I think as an industry, we set ourselves up for long-term burnout, dissatisfaction and failures because we don't say to people, this is your job. These are the things it's going to involve. You're going to be picking up the phone to journalists. If you fundamentally can't find something interesting in that basic concept of finding stories, selling those stories to people, meeting people that you don't know, picking up the phone cold and talking to people who perhaps don't want to talk to you that day. If you can't find enjoyment in those things, this probably isn't the career for you, no matter what level you get to.
It's a slightly more philosophical answer than I was expecting, but it's so true of any job. In fact, it's true of life. If you're not enjoying what you're doing right now, are you just kind of wishing your career away while you're trying to get to that next?
Yeah, but it does come down to much more, well, what can we take away from that practically? That if you're always looking to tomorrow and the next thing you're going to get to, then you're not giving the time that is appropriate to the things that are on your to-do list today. You're not finding ways of making things work better. You're not enjoying what you're up to. I mean, just a glance at my to-do list, I've got a very big story, a piece of content that I'm creating for a client at the moment. And a big part of that for me is finding elements of it that are enjoyable for me to do. I'm loving going in and picking apart the data from the research that we're doing. In an agency, someone who's been around as long as I have might delegate that to somebody else. But there are things that you can find to enjoy in that. And then I love the fact that tomorrow I'm going to be writing the press release. And finding the words to explain that story is still something that I do and enjoy. And again, doesn't need to be delegated just because I've been around long enough that if I wanted to, I could probably just spend my life in capacity planner spreadsheets.
So now you've reached a certain level? I mean, you started long enough ago to be using a fax machine at a PR agency. Now that you're at your level, are there things that you say no to when your clients ask you to do that?
There definitely are, and there are things that over the years I've worked out that not only do I not enjoy so much, but through thinking about why, I've worked out that they're not necessarily things that play into my skill set so well. So there's one company that I work with at the moment where I manage a load of other people like me in markets across EMEA and LATAM. And I also have someone like me who covers the UK. And yes, arguably, and the client has asked me, is that something that you can do for us? And I said no, and was able to navigate that and say no. And that does come with time, but it also comes with techniques, because saying no could have just put the client off and sent them to someone else who was prepared to do all of the things they wanted in one package. There's ways to navigate those no's.
I guess one of the things that a lot of people talk about giving up as they progress up the ladder is media relations. Is that something that you still do, or do you feel a certain way about it?
Well, I don't love it, actually. And I do enjoy it with the journalists that I have existing relationships with, but I had a big gap with going to Australia, then having my son. And so in tech journalism, a couple of years was all it took for an awful lot of the contacts that I had to have moved on. However, there are still a lot of the sort of top editors who have been around, and I do still enjoy talking to them. But no, it's not something that I carve out as a day-to-day, I want a big media cell role from a client. And I spend a lot of time looking for people who do that, but do it with more than 2 years experience. And there's an awfully large price that freelancers can put on their head if they are prepared and have the relationships and are prepared to do press pitching.
But it goes back to your earlier point, I think. When you're doing these jobs that seem really naff and boring, you may not actually realise the real value that you're adding to the agency and the client.
Absolutely. The money that this client I was talking about earlier with the content, the money they're putting into creating that content is only ever going to be as successful as the people who pick up the phone and sell it in to the journalists. And I think the way we set up agencies, it's often very easy for the people that are doing the pitching to feel like they're a less important, a less strategic part of that campaign. And actually, they're the absolutely critical part of the campaign.
Well, I've talked to some people recently who have said, look, I've just got so much work and it's stressful, but I have to keep up with it because there's no real way to get out of it. But when I'm doing all these tasks, whether they be admin or something even that I enjoy, I may be adding value and maybe bringing money into the agency, but am I getting really rewarded for it?
Well, I think there's have a think about how you might want to be rewarded. What does that reward look like? You've said they're not going to turn around and put a load of money in my pay packet. Well, potentially they will, because hiring and training people that are good at your job is difficult and expensive. But taking the successes that you have and using them to get your way and get part of other conversations that you might want to be involved in. I work with a guy in France who is constantly pushing back on the content that gets produced in any other market, as you might expect from a French PR professional. But because he's great with the media, he gets the results. I know he has the relationships, and I know that the pushback that he's giving me comes from a truth, comes from an experience that he's built up. He has the room and the leeway to do those pushbacks and then to get himself invited into the room when we're coming up with the story ideas, because ultimately we know if he doesn't approve them further down the line, they're not going anywhere in France. So think about the ways that you can take the skills that you have and explain to everybody around you how crucial they are in the success process, and use that to get involved in other parts of the planning cycle, the conversations that you might want to be party to. But also use it to say no where necessary based on strong facts and experience.
It does feel, I think, a lot to people like saying no is a luxury you only get when you get to a certain point in your career and have a certain job title and the authority that comes with it. I remember in some of the workshops we did, saying no was one of your favourite subjects.
I love it.
You would say no by saying yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the techniques that I use is you ask questions. When someone has asked you to do something, a classic example is you're a senior account exec, account manager, and you've been told, here is a very flimsy channel announcement that's dry as a bone, and we want you to pitch it to the media. And you don't want to pitch it to the media because they will hate you and it's not interesting. And of course they shouldn't write about it. You know they shouldn't write about it. Their audience won't be interested. So how do you say no? How do you push back, either to your boss or to your client? The first thing to do is ask questions to understand where the request has come from. So why do they want you to pitch this story? Is it something within the story that's important? Is it a relationship with the partner that's involved in the story? Is it that they want to secure coverage in the channel press? Is it that they want more channel partners? What has been the basis of the request in the first place? And then you can start to propose alternatives, different ways of achieving that objective that don't require you picking up the phone to someone who is not going to welcome the phone call. And in that way, you've pivoted them away from the thing that you fundamentally don't want to do and ended up with a situation where you don't have to do it because you've come up with a much better way of achieving the goal.
So you're kind of saying, rather than just saying, yes, I'll do it, or no, I won't do it, you're actually talking about negotiating your way to the real goal, finding out what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. To say no, you have to be able to find something that you can say yes to, and walk your client or your boss through that thought process. And done well, you practice it a few times, you'll start to find that they feel more intelligent. They feel like they've helped find those answers themselves. And the interaction's been quite pleasant on both sides. It's not a confrontational no conversation. It's sort of enabling everybody to say yes to something better.
I think one of the things that I heard recently that I remember when I was younger and a bit more junior, people saying they've just got no control. So I've got no power in the face of just this work. I can't say no to my client, and I can't say no because I am junior.
So specifically in the context of the world as it is at the moment, we're all working in our little isolated bubbles. There is nobody in this room other than my puppy, fast asleep, who knows what I'm up to. And if I'm having a stressed day, to the outside world, that probably doesn't look that different to me having a good day. And so I think one of the important things for us to do is be much better at communicating what we've got going on to the people that we work with, because it isn't naturally visible. If you're sitting in an office, you can pick up on vibes, you can see someone moving quite swiftly at their desk. People don't have those cues to go off. So simple techniques like time boxing in your shared Outlook calendar so that people can see what you've got on. And then
Sorry, what's time boxing?
So going into your Outlook and putting in the same way that you would if you had a meeting, putting in a physical box that says what you're working on at any particular time. It's a really useful time management technique for your own sake to make sure everything fits into your day, but it's also a way of making it visible to other people that you've got lots on and what you're working on at any particular time, so that if someone comes up to you with a request for something, you've straight away got a data source that you can go to say, yes, I can do that really important thing, but let's have a conversation about what else is going to have to give, what can move to tomorrow, what you can perhaps pass back to your boss to redelegate within the team in order for you to get that thing done. It sort of equips you with the evidence you need to negotiate requests that come in that might just be pushing you over the edge in terms of capacity.
That's like one of the Henshaw Centre principles of make your workload visible.
Yeah, make it visible and then communicate it well.
So when it comes to getting overwhelmed, you must have been overwhelmed. You must still get it sometimes with just way too much to do.
Well, the answer that hopefully you'll edit out is I go and hide under my duvet for about 5 minutes, have a little meltdown in private. And I think that understanding the way the human brain works, and that sometimes having that little bit of a moment is fine, as long as it doesn't then last the rest of the day, so that you can take yourself away from the situation, make a cup of tea. That sounds more grown up. Don't hide under the duvet. Make a cup of tea, have a think, and then proactively plan through how you're going to deal with it. So write your to-do lists. Think about what's urgent and what's important, and make decisions on what you're going to do, how you're going to prioritise it, based on those sorts of logical thought processes, rather than here's a big long list, I'll start at the top and I'll work my way down it, growing in panic as my day runs out.
Yeah, growing in panic is a familiar feeling. So what we're saying is don't dismiss those feelings, deal with them first and then work.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been a lot more conversation, I think, over the last few years around mental health. And I think it plays into that, whether you're someone who identifies as dealing with anxiety in a conscious way, or just someone who's having a bad day. The pause and the recognition of the emotion that you're feeling, and the acceptance that it's okay. It's not a failure of yourself if, when confronted with a really stressful day, you have a bit of a stress out. That's a natural process and a part of the process to ultimately reaching the end of the day where you've done all the things you needed to and you're having a nice gin and tonic. But allowing yourself to experiencing it, putting some parameters around how, is it that you go away from your desk so that you have that designated anxious moment away from your desk, and then you can come back and look clearly at things. Little techniques help for some people, just tidying a desk. When you're in that stress, I've got too much to do, 5 minutes, I'm going to tidy my desk. It's non-urgent, but it will help me get the brain space to think about, well, what are the urgent things and how will I prioritise my day, and set myself up in a way that means I can succeed in it.
So it's good to change your setting and your mood to get you back in the work mode, but really importantly, just allow yourself to have that wobble.
Yeah, absolutely. And also having people around you that you can communicate those wobbles to. I think sometimes we're in work mode, we're always feeling that we have to perform, and we can't acknowledge when we're struggling with things. I don't realistically think that's the case. I think when you've worked with people for a while and you've shown your value, you can also show weakness as well. But if you're not comfortable doing that, finding peer support, perhaps outside of the immediate day-to-day hierarchy, reporting hierarchy on a task, where you can get a little bit of a sanity conversation, check things with someone who might know things but doesn't have meat in that particular game. Those sorts of networks, I think, have been particularly important this year.
So what you're saying, in the context of the pandemic, it's normal to feel a little bit overwhelmed, a little bit anxious about your workload. But if you're feeling powerless, well, you might actually be wrong about the power that you have.
Absolutely, yeah. And you can look at ways that you can find that power yourself. But also, I do think openness is generally a good thing. So I don't think if you're feeling powerless and we're giving you skills and things to think about to find that power for yourself, there's no reason why you can't also have that conversation with your boss and explain to them, I'm feeling powerless. It's meaning that there's an increased anxiety and a lack of control that I'm feeling day to day. So how can we, me and my boss, find a way to deal with that powerlessness? We don't have to address all of these problems by ourselves.
Is that something that some people might see as a weakness in you?
No, I really don't believe it is. Fundamentally, you're working with human beings, so they're probably dealing with or have dealt with very similar issues themselves. But also, it goes back to reminding yourself of where your skills lie, where your value is. I'm amazing at pitching the press. I'm the best person there is at pitching the press, or I write the best byline that can be written. And so it's okay for me to, that same person that writes the great byline articles, be having a difficult Wednesday and being a bit challenged with feeling powerlessness and out of control. And it is my boss's job to support me through that because they reap the value from my amazing writing.
Things are definitely different. It's working patterns, but the way we talk to each other, the amount of time and space we give each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there have been good things that have come out of our changing working patterns over the last year. One of them is visibility into people's personal lives outside of the office. And yeah, whether it's an understanding from your boss who is trying to homeschool 3 kids, that life isn't straightforward and that work isn't always the priority. I think that was one of the early learnings at the sort of spring, summer 2020, where people started to be able to express, right now, this perhaps isn't your priority, and that was fine. Well, now we've sort of moved on. We've got used to a new normal. And I think some of that initial people being accommodating to that has lessened a little bit. I don't think it's as powerful as it was, but still seeing people sitting at home, seeing their life, their real background and why, a child wandering in, that sort of thing, I think has really opened the door to having conversations. But it does require everybody to ask questions, to be open about what's going on and why they're working in particular ways. I mean, that could be a real opportunity. If your boss is homeschooling and can't work between the hours of 9 and 3, and so wants to change their working day, that might actually really suit you too, despite not having children that you're homeschooling. So there's there's no reason at all why we can't have honest conversations about changing things to suit all of us.
Bring your whole self to work is really taking on a different meaning as you're bringing your entire bedroom to work as well.
Yeah, people with all sorts of strange backgrounds. Someone that I do a weekly Zoom call with always has pants drying on a laundry hanger behind him, always has pants. And we gloss over it, we don't talk about it. There's clearly within his apartment a shared space for laundry and working at the moment, and that's fine. But I think there are also interesting ways of dealing with things. I was talking to someone recently who flat shares, and they have a very small shared sort of living kitchen area and 2 bedrooms, which is fine for their life in their 20s in the normal world. But what they've started doing just recently is swapping bedrooms. So they're not working in their own bedroom. So they'll get up in the morning and go to their desk, which is in a different room, and then they leave it nice and tidy so that when they go back into their own bedroom, they're not looking at someone else's messy work desk. But it just gives them a different environment. And I think people are having to be a bit more creative in that way.
It's all right for people who are at senior director level, sitting in their spare room or their second spare room, shed office or whatever. But there are all these people who are working in, shared houses, sharing kitchen tables, working the bedroom.
Yeah, and I think it's about boundaries. She says that she's being harassed by a puppy. So it's about boundaries. So we usually get up and spend some time commuting to work. And so that's free time now that we can use to prepare our space for work. So even if you're living in a studio flat and your bedroom is your kitchen, is your living room, and you've essentially been locked up in one of HMP type institutions for the last 12 months, you can still change that environment and prepare it as you enter and exit different tasks. I was having a conversation in an online group recently about how people prepare at the beginning of the working day and at the end of the working day, what rituals they go through to prepare the space that they might have just woken up in to suddenly be a place where they're expected to be productive and creative and energized and professional for the next 8 or so hours. And yeah, little things like making sure your curtains are open, making sure your bed is made so that you've mentally put away that part of your day, and then arranging things in a different way, putting a throw over the bed so that it changes the colour of the room for when it's your working environment. Little things like that. Cups of tea at certain points of the day to mark the beginning and the end can all really help as you're trying to manage that space that you're trapped in.
I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens when we are allowed to go back to offices and how many people adopt this hybrid model properly. I've always thought that working from home was treated like a favour that was given to people who wanted to, go home and hang their pants up behind them. And it was treated as if it was some kind of benefit rather than something that was allowing somebody to get work done.
It's interesting because back in the day, and I very early on started doing 1 day a week from home. I was a senior account exec. There was no I wasn't in the traditional role that started to be able to negotiate these things. And so, yeah, I navigated it when it was very alien, and you'd have, here's my list of articles that I'm going to write, and this is why I can justify needing to be away from the office. And working from home was set up as this deliberate step away from the team, avoidance of distraction. And I think that's changed, and I don't think we need to go back to it in the same way. I think partly because of the technologies that we have and the way that people have had to run around in the last year to make it workable, we can now realistically interact in exactly the same way as someone who is across the office when you're from home. So I think the challenges have changed. I think it's less about justifying it, or it will be less about justifying it, and it will be more about, well, how do we defend our working from home space to get back the advantages it used to have of avoiding distraction, and make sure that we're focusing and productive on the things that we might perhaps choose to do from home when working from home is no longer compulsory.
One of the things that I've even heard recently was, well, I'm worried that my team aren't actually pitching those journalists that they should be calling up, and that they're just sitting there watching Netflix instead.
No, I don't believe they are. I've worked in a lot of agencies with a lot of teams, and yes, there are people that I've worked with who weren't very good at their job or, didn't cut it in PR. But we all know who they are, and we all know who they're not. And yes, some of our team members might have lazy days, but generally we're all in this because we quite enjoy it as a career. There's easier careers to do, and I think giving the teams around us the respect and understanding that we are good at our jobs, we are going to work, is sort of the first part of a really essential behaviour for managers.
Presence management software is one of those things that's really having an effect. People are turning up to work or want to be seen to be turning up to work, and the little dots that tell people whether you're away or whether you're working are probably not a good thing.
You can game that system easily. It's all about expectation. So if you're one of these people that is used to there being a green light by everybody, and it means that they're there and working, well, start to use that as a way of managing your time. Change your status regularly into different things so that the green light isn't a shorthand for yes, they're working. It's clear that you've just had a conversation with your boss. You've said you're going to come back in half an hour with some ideas for how you might have another go at pitching a story that didn't work. Change your status on those tools that show a boss whether you're at your desk or working, and come back half an hour later with the answer. No, you weren't at your desk working. You were emptying the dishwasher and you were thinking through the problem, and you came back and you delivered. And so I think use some of those tools that perhaps lazier managers might be using as an easy way, what they think is an easy way of tracking productivity, and show that they're not actually very linked with productivity, and that you don't have to be sitting at your desk in a completely clean room environment in order to be productive. One of the most successful PR people I know, who I've met through my career and is a very good friend of mine, works all the time with the TV on in the background. It blows my mind. My brain doesn't do that. It can never do that, but hers can. And so it's very cool, the idea of whether you're going to work or watch Netflix. It perhaps is a slightly misleading question in itself.
So if I've got this right, you're actually advocating doing things like the laundry or emptying the dishwasher during your working day because you're saying it actually helps, and that should be billable time.
Yeah, absolutely. In the same way that you'd charge if you're in a naff, unproductive brainstorm, everybody would put that hour on their timesheets. It's important to be professional about it. If you're on a dog walk and you come back and actually you met up with someone and you chatted about dog rearing techniques for the entire way around the park, no, you can't say, well, I had some brain space and that helped. But if you are actually thinking about things, and if you're thinking about things consciously, and you arrive back at your desk having navigated some of the challenges that otherwise you'd still have to navigate, then of course you should be putting that down as billable time. The trick is, if you're being honest with yourself, you can justify it to your boss. And if you're a bit dodgy on whether it's fair with yourself, you're never going to be able to justify that time entry.
Yeah, that's just like doing your expenses, really.
Just like expenses, yeah. The way to think about it is, I was doing the billable activity. I was thinking, if at the same time I was able to do something that was personally productive as well, that's irrelevant. Loading the dishwasher doesn't undo the fact that I was also doing work at the same time. And so, that thought process and capturing that, recognizing that is part of the task. When you've got a press release to write, you don't just bill the time when your fingers are physically touching the letter keys on your keyboard. There is thinking time, and whether you're doing that with a pen in your hand sitting at your desk, or whether you're doing that while out walking the dog, knowing that when you come back in you're going to be sitting down and starting to type, I think there needs to be a real recognition that is active client work, and that the thinking time is critical.
I guess working from home gives us more space to do the kind of things like emptying the dishwasher. God, I wish more people in offices would spend time emptying the dishwasher, or filling it rather. But it gives us the time to actually do those things without feeling awkward that people are thinking, well, what the hell are we doing?
I think that's going to be one of the big challenges, and sort of as an industry, I think we, and particularly the managers among us, those who have team members that look to us to set an example, is to really think about, well, how do we take those habits that we got into that were perhaps really good habits, and how do we apply them back in the work environment? When I used to work at Hotwire, we had... well, I suppose all buildings have full sides, but anyway, you could walk around the building, go outside and walk around the building. And somebody that I worked with, I never did this. It was not a good habit I had, but he used to sit at his to-do list, work out what the next task was going to be, walk away from his desk, get fresh air. He'd be gone, 4 minutes, walking around the building and coming back up in the lift. And that gave him that break time. So, you can engineer it within the traditional office environment.
You've talked a lot about recognizing your value and, focusing on things that really matter, looking after yourself and communicating.
Yeah, absolutely. Empower yourself. Find habits, find processes that work for you, or ask Liton to provide some processes and techniques that can work for you. And be really aware of your value, and use the confidence that comes with understanding your value to take that power, to say no, to make situations work for you. And fundamentally, and it goes back to the very first thing I talked about, to find the enjoyment in the job that you do. Wherever you're working, whatever's going on in your life, and you're trying to navigate, whatever the limitations of that are, you've got to find things sitting within your work that you can enjoy and that give you a kick, because otherwise it's just a constant battle.